stood in the corner of the massive reception hall, holding his drink too tightly. The glass was made of some alien crystal that changed colors when you touched it. Right now, it was glowing a nervous yellow that matched exactly how he felt inside. He had never seen so many different alien species in one place. The diplomatic mixer on Harmony Point Station was supposed to be a friendly cultural exchange, but felt completely out of his depth. 3 months ago, he had been processing trade permits on Earth. Now he was representing humanity at one of the most important gatherings in the galaxy. A group of tall, blue-skinned aliens with too many arms walked past him, speaking in clicks and whistles. Near the buffet table, some rock-like creatures were having what seemed like a very serious discussion about mineral rights. Took another sip of his drink and wished he was back home. "You look lost," said a smooth voice behind him. Turned around and nearly dropped his glass. 3 of the most beautiful beings he had ever seen were standing there, smiling at him. They looked almost human, but their skin had a soft silver glow, and their eyes were deep purple like the space between stars. They wore elegant robes that seemed to move on their own, shifting between different shades of blue and silver. "I'm sorry," said, feeling his face turn red. "I'm still new to all this diplomatic stuff. I'm from Earth." The 3 women exchanged glances that seemed to carry whole conversations. The tallest one stepped forward first. "I am Lyra," she said with a slight bow. "These are my sisters Nova and Stella. We are." Had heard of. They were one of the most advanced species in the galaxy. Their technology was centuries ahead of everyone else, and they were known for being very selective about who they talked to. The fact that they were even speaking to him was surprising. "It's an honor to meet you," said, trying to remember his diplomatic training. "I've heard wonderful things about your people." Nova, who had shorter hair that sparkled like stardust, tilted her head slightly. "We are curious about human customs," she said. "We have studied your species, but there is much we do not understand." "Oh," said, relaxing a little, "what would you like to know?" Stella, the youngest looking of the 3, spoke up. Her voice was musical like wind chimes. "We have read about human pair bonding rituals. How does your species choose mates?" Nearly choked on his drink. Of all the questions they could ask, they had to ask about that. His recent breakup with Sarah was still a sore spot. She had left him for a guy who had a better job and a nicer apartment. The whole thing still hurt. "Well," said, trying to laugh it off, "it's complicated. Humans usually pair up one-on-one, not like some species that have group bonds. We date, get to know each other, fall in love hopefully." He paused and gave a bitter laugh. "Though I'm clearly failing at it since I'm single." The moment the words left his mouth, knew something had changed. The 3 sisters went completely still. Their purple eyes widened, and they looked at each other with expressions he couldn't read. Then they started speaking to each other in their own language, a beautiful musical sound that reminded of singing wind. Other aliens around them had stopped talking and were now staring at the 4 of them. Felt like he was missing something very important, but he had no idea what. The sisters finished their conversation and turned back to him. All 3 of them were smiling now, but there was something different in their eyes, something that made his heart beat faster. "You said you are single," Lyra repeated carefully, as if the word was precious. "Yes," said slowly. "My girlfriend broke up with me a few months ago. Why? Is that important?" Without warning, all 3 sisters reached out and gently took his arms. Lyra took his left arm, Nova took his right, and Stella placed her hand on his shoulder. Their touch was warm and sent little tingles through his skin. The entire reception hall went silent. Every alien in the room was now staring at them, looked around nervously, wondering if he had broken some rule he didn't know about. "Did I do something wrong?" he whispered. The sisters laughed, a sound like silver bells. "No, of Earth," Nova said. "You did something very right." "We would be honored," Stella added, "if you would attend our cultural presentation tomorrow. We have much to show you about traditions." And much to learn about human ones, Lyra finished. Nodded, still confused but flattered by their attention. I would love to. Should I meet you somewhere? We will come for you, all three said at the same time, which was both beautiful and slightly creepy. As the evening went on, noticed that other aliens kept approaching him with new respect. Species that had ignored him earlier were now eager to introduce themselves. A group of insect-like creatures offered to share their traditional fermented honey. The rock beings invited him to their philosophical discussion. But through it all, the three sisters stayed close to him. They didn't leave his side for the rest of the evening, and whenever someone tried to monopolize his attention for too long, one of them would smoothly step in to redirect the conversation. When the mixer finally ended, walked back to his quarters in a daze. He had no idea what had just happened, but he felt like his simple joke about being single had changed everything. The way the sisters had looked at him, the way other aliens had started treating him differently, it all meant something. As he reached his door, he turned back to see the three sisters watching him from the end of the corridor. They waved at him in perfect unison, their robes flowing like water around them. Waved back and went inside, wondering what tomorrow would bring. He had the feeling that his quiet life as a trade permit processor was officially over. Woke up to find a silver box outside his door. It was warm to the touch and hummed softly, like a cat purring. When he opened it, the most amazing smell filled his room. Inside were 3 different types of food, each one more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. The first looked like golden fruits that glowed from within. The second was a soup that changed colors as he watched, shifting from deep blue to bright green. The third appeared to be some kind of bread, but it was perfectly clear like crystal and felt lighter than air. There was a note written in elegant handwriting, "Traditional breakfast foods. We hope you enjoy them. We will come for you at midday." Lyra, Nova, and Stella tasted each dish carefully. The golden fruit was sweet and made him feel energized. The color-changing soup tasted like every good memory he had ever had. The crystal bread dissolved on his tongue and left him feeling satisfied without being full. He had barely finished eating when his door chimed. Captain from the human diplomatic team stood outside, looking confused and a little worried. She said, stepping into his quarters, "What exactly did you do last night?" "I talked to some," said. "They were very nice." "Why?" Captain sat down heavily on his couch. "The embassy contacted us this morning. They want to arrange formal cultural exchanges, with you specifically. They've requested private meeting rooms, compatibility assessments, and—" She paused, looking at her tablet. "Traditional courtship protocols." "Courtship protocols," laughed. "Captain, I think there's been a misunderstanding. They just want to share cultures. They brought me breakfast this morning to be friendly." Captain stared at him. "Don't share food with aliens. Ever. They barely talk to other species unless it's absolutely necessary, and they definitely don't request courtship protocols." Before could respond, his door chimed again. All 3 sisters stood outside, now wearing different robes that seemed to be made of liquid starlight. They smiled when they saw him, and felt his heart do something strange in his chest. Lyra said warmly, "Are you ready for our cultural exchange?" "Of course," said, grabbing his jacket. He turned to Captain. "See, cultural exchange." As they walked through the station, noticed that other aliens moved out of their way. Some actually bowed as the sisters passed. They acknowledged these gestures with graceful nods, but their attention remained focused on. They led him to a section of the station he had never seen before. The corridors here were made of the same crystal material as their food containers, and everything seemed to glow with soft light. "This is the quarter," Nova explained. "Very few aliens have been invited here." "I'm honored," said, and he meant it. They brought him to a beautiful room filled with floating shelves that held books, art pieces, and what looked like musical instruments. Stella gestured for him to sit on a couch that molded itself to his body perfectly. "We would like to share our literature with you," she said, bringing him a book that felt warm in his hands. For the next several hours, the sisters took turns reading to him from their traditional stories. The tales were beautiful and complex, full of heroes who faced impossible odds and found strength in unity. Found himself completely absorbed. "These are wonderful," he said when they finished. "Are these stories special to your family?" The sisters exchanged those meaningful glances again. "Yes," Lyra said softly. "These are the stories we share only with those who might become part of our family." Nodded, thinking this was just another interesting cultural tradition. He told them some Earth in return, and they listened with intense attention, asking detailed questions about every character and plot point. As the day continued, they showed him their art, their music, and even some of their technology. Everything they shared seemed precious and personal, but just thought they were being good hosts. When evening came, they insisted on walking him back to his quarters. Along the way, they stopped at what appeared to be a medical facility. "We have arranged compatibility assessments," Nova said, "to ensure that our continued cultural exchange will not cause any biological problems." "That's very thoughtful," said, though he wondered why they needed to test compatibility for cultural exchange. The medical exam was thorough but gentle. The doctor, an older female with silver hair, asked him many questions about his health, his family history, and even his emotional state. She seemed particularly interested in his ability to handle stress and adapt to new situations. "Your species is remarkable," she told him afterward. "Very resilient, very adaptable." "Thank you," said, though he wasn't sure why that mattered for sharing cultures. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. The sisters brought him meals, shared their most treasured possessions, and spent hours talking with him about everything from philosophy to their childhood memories. Enjoyed their company enormously. They were intelligent, funny in their own way, and surprisingly interested in human emotions. "Tell us about heartbreak," Stella asked one afternoon. "We have studied this concept, but we do not understand how humans recover from it." Thought about Sarah and the pain he had felt when she left. "It hurts a lot at first," he said honestly, "like someone tore a piece out of you, but then you realize that you're still whole even without that person. You learn that you're stronger than you thought." The sisters listened with rapt attention, asking follow-up questions about resilience, forgiveness, and the ability to love again after being hurt. "Humans are remarkable," Lyra said softly. "To love so deeply, lose so much, and still remain open to love again." Shrugged, "What's the alternative? Giving up on happiness? That doesn't seem like much of a life." On the fifth day, something changed. An older woman appeared at its door. She was tall and elegant, with silver hair arranged in an elaborate style and robes that seemed to contain entire galaxies. Her presence filled the room like a force of nature. "I am Matriarch Cosmos," she said in a voice that commanded attention. "I am here to meet the human male who has captured the interest of my granddaughters." His brain froze. Granddaughters, captured interest. Suddenly, all the food, the cultural sharing, the compatibility tests, and the personal questions made sense in a completely different way. "Oh," said weakly, "oh no." The matriarch smiled, and it was like watching a star being born. "Oh yes, young human, oh yes, indeed." Sat across from Matriarch Cosmos in her private meeting room, feeling like he was being examined under a microscope. The old woman had kind eyes, but there was an intelligence behind them that made him nervous. She had been asking him questions for an hour, and none of them were about trade permits or diplomacy. "Tell me," she said, pouring him tea from a pot that floated in the air, "what do you do when faced with an impossible situation?" Thought about it carefully. "I guess I try to find a solution anyway, even if it's not perfect, even if it might not work. Giving up before you try just guarantees failure." "Interesting," the matriarch said. and when someone you care about is in danger. You help them, said without hesitation. Even if it's dangerous for you, that's what caring about someone means. The matriarch nodded slowly. My granddaughters tell me you have experienced heartbreak recently. How has this affected your ability to trust and love? Felt his cheeks burn, so the sisters had told their grandmother everything. It hurt, he admitted, but I learned things about myself. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought and that being hurt doesn't mean I have to stop caring about people. Most species become more cautious after emotional pain, the matriarch observed. They build walls to protect themselves. Humans seem to do the opposite. Before could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The lights changed from warm white to flashing red, and an automated voice began speaking in multiple languages. Emergency, all civilians to safe zones, pirate vessels approaching. This is not a drill. The matriarch stood gracefully, showing no sign of panic. How unfortunate. We should go to the protected areas. But was already moving toward the door. Wait, what about the refugee transport? I saw it docking this morning. It was full of families with children. The station security will handle the situation, the matriarch said calmly. Stopped and looked back at her. With respect, ma'am, what if they can't? What if they need help? Without waiting for an answer, ran out of the room and toward the docking bays. Behind him, he heard the matriarch speaking rapidly probably calling her granddaughters. The corridor was chaos. Aliens of all species were running toward the safe zones, their faces filled with fear, pushed through the crowd, going in the opposite direction. Several people shouted at him that he was going the wrong way, but he ignored them. He reached the docking bay to find exactly what he had feared. The refugee transport was still connected to the station, but the crew was having trouble getting everyone off quickly enough. Hundreds of beings, families, elderly, children were crowded together, trying to get through airlocks that were too small for the emergency. We need more time, one of the transport crew members was saying to a station security officer. The evacuation protocols weren't designed for this many people. The pirates will be here in 10 minutes, the security officer replied. We have to evacuate this section. Then help us, said, stepping forward. We can set up multiple evacuation routes. The security officer looked at him in surprise. Sir, you need to get to a safe zone. This area will be sealed off. Not without these people, said firmly. Look, I used to work in logistics. If we use the maintenance corridors, we can evacuate twice as fast. We just need to organize it properly. For a moment, the security officer hesitated. Then another alarm sounded. The pirates were closer than expected. Fine, the officer said. What do you need? Quickly explained his plan. Instead of trying to move everyone through the main corridors, they would split into smaller groups and use multiple routes. The stronger adults would help carry the elderly and small children. The crew members would guide each group to different safe zones to avoid overcrowding. But someone needs to stay here to coordinate, said, to make sure everyone gets out. I'll do it, the security officer said. No, said, you have weapons and training. You need to be ready in case the pirates break through. I'll stay. It was a crazy plan made up on the spot, but it worked. The refugees began moving faster, flowing through the station like water finding multiple paths downhill, stood at the center of it all, directing traffic and solving problems as they came up. When a family of small, furry aliens got separated in the crowd, personally went to find them and bring them back together. When an elderly creature collapsed from exhaustion, carried him to safety himself. When the children started crying from fear, made funny faces and told jokes until they laughed instead. Through it all, he could see the three sisters watching from a nearby observation deck. Their grandmother was with them, and all four women seemed fascinated by what they were seeing. The last group was just leaving when the pirates finally broke through the station's outer defenses. Could hear weapon fire in the distance, getting closer. The security officer grabbed his arm. Time to go, human, now. But had seen something the others missed. A small child, one of the furry aliens, was hiding under a cargo container, too scared to come out. Go ahead, told the security officer. I'll be right behind you. Instead of following orders, crawled under the container to reach the frightened child. The little alien was shaking and making soft, whimpering sounds. Hey there, said gently. I know you're scared, but we need to go find your family. They're worried about you. The child looked at him with huge, tear-filled eyes and said something in a language didn't understand. But fear was universal, held out his hand. Trust me, he said. I won't let anything happen to you. The child reached out and took his hand just as the first pirates burst into the docking bay. Scooped up the little alien and ran toward the exit, laser blasts lighting up the air behind him. He made it to the safe zone with seconds to spare, handing the child over to its grateful parents just as the blast doors sealed shut. The entire refugee population erupted in cheers. Beings of dozen different species pressed forward to thank him, to touch his hands, to tell him he was a hero. Just smiled and said he was glad everyone was safe. Later, after the pirates had been driven off and the all-clear was given, found himself alone with the sisters and their grandmother. You could have died, Lyra said, her voice filled with something couldn't identify. So could that child if I hadn't helped, replied. That wouldn't have been acceptable. You had no military training, Nova pointed out. No weapons, no armor. You were the least qualified person in that docking bay to face pirates. Shrugged, maybe, but I was the one who was there and could help. Sometimes that's enough. You risked your life for people you had never met, Stella said softly. Beings that aren't even your species. They needed help, said, as if that explained everything. When someone needs help and you can give it, you do. That's just human, I guess. Matriarch Cosmos stepped forward and placed her hand on his shoulder. Her eyes were shining with something that might have been tears. Now I understand, she said quietly, why my granddaughters have chosen you. Felt his heart stop. Chosen me for what? The three sisters stepped closer, their expressions serious but warm. We need to talk, they said in unison. The private meeting room felt smaller with all four in it. Sat on the edge of his chair, looking at the three sisters and their grandmother. His hands were sweating, and he kept wiping them on his pants. Before we begin, Matriarch Cosmos said gently, you should understand something about our people. Do not form bonds lightly. We are very logical, very careful about matters of the heart. Nodded, though he wasn't sure where this was going. For over 1,000 years, Lyra continued, our people have bonded only with each other. We have studied other species, but none have ever called to us. Called to you, asked. It is difficult to explain in your language, Nova said. When find their life partners, there is a recognition, a certainty. The heart knows before the mind does. Stella leaned forward slightly. When you said you were single, when you spoke about your heartbreak and your ability to heal and love again, something awakened in us. All three of us felt it at the same time. Felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Are you saying? We are asking if you would consider a formal courtship bond, the three sisters said together. With all of us. All of you, his voice cracked slightly. Bond in family groups, the matriarch explained. Usually 3 to 5 individuals who complement each other perfectly. It is not like human pair bonding. It is deeper, more complex, more complete. Stood up and started packing. This was way beyond anything he had ever imagined. Dating one alien would have been confusing enough, but 3. I don't understand, he said. Why me? You could have anyone in the galaxy. You're brilliant, beautiful, advanced. I'm just a guy from Earth who processes trade permits. You are wrong, Lyra said firmly. You are a male who sees a problem and finds a solution, even when there should not be one. You are someone who risks everything for strangers without thinking of reward. You are a being who has been hurt but chooses to remain open to love, Nova added. This is not weakness. This is incredible strength. You are someone who makes others laugh even when you are afraid, Stella finished, who finds joy in darkness and shares it freely. Stopped packing and looked at them. They were serious, completely, utterly serious. I need time to think, he said. Of course, the matriarch said, but you should know that news of our interest in you is already spreading through the diplomatic community. There will be complications. She was right. By the next morning's door chime hadn't stopped ringing. First came Ambassador Williams from the Earth delegation, his face red with excitement. Do you realize what this means? A formal alliance with the could advance human technology by centuries. You have to accept. An hour later, it was Ambassador from the Federation. Her insect-like features were hard to read, but her tone was threatening. Human, they have refused all alliance offers for generations. If they bond with your species first, it will upset the balance of power. This cannot be allowed. Then came the trade delegation, the military, and a dozen other groups, all with their own reasons why should or shouldn't accept the courtship bond. By noon, felt like his head was spinning. He had gone from being a nobody to being the center of galactic politics overnight. The weight of it all was crushing. He was trying to eat lunch in his quarters when his door chimed again. This time it was Captain, and she looked worried. We have a problem, she said, coming inside and checking the walls for listening devices. Intel picked up some chatter. There are groups that don't want this bond to happen. They think it will make humans too powerful. What kind of groups? Asked, though he was afraid of the answer. The kind that might try to solve the problem permanently, she said quietly. You need protection. Was about to respond when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, but by then, dark shapes were already moving through his quarters. The assassins were fast and silent, but they had made one mistake. They had assumed would be helpless. Instead, he grabbed the chair he had been sitting in and swung it at the first attacker, buying himself time to shout a warning. Get down. The next few minutes were chaos. Captain proved that human military training was nothing to laugh at, taking down 2 attackers with precise strikes. Found himself fighting for his life with whatever he could grab, a lamp, a food container, his own fists. Just when it seemed like they might be overwhelmed, the door exploded inward. The 3 sisters flowed into the room like liquid starlight, moving with grace and deadly precision. Lyra's hands began to glow with some kind of energy, and one of the assassins simply collapsed. Nova moved so fast she seemed to blur, disarming 3 attackers in seconds. Stella sang a single note, and the remaining enemies fell asleep standing up. In less than a minute, it was over. Are you hurt? All 3 sisters asked at once, surrounding and checking him for injuries. I'm fine, said, though he was shaking. How did you know? We felt your distress, Lyra said simply. When you are in danger, we know. Is that part of the bond thing? Asked. No, Nova said softly. That is something else, something we have never experienced before. Captain, who was zip-tying the unconscious assassins, looked up at them. This isn't over. Whoever sent these people won't give up easily. Looked at the 3 sisters, so beautiful and powerful, and realized that being with them would mean a lifetime of this kind of danger. People would always want to use their bond for political gain, or destroy it to prevent others from benefiting. Maybe, said slowly, this isn't such a good idea. Maybe it would be safer for everyone if I said no. The sisters exchanged glances, and for a moment thought he saw sadness in their eyes. Safety is not the only consideration, Stella said quietly. Love requires courage, Nova added. The question is, Lyra said, stepping closer to him, are you brave enough to choose happiness even when it is difficult? Looked at each of them in turn. Despite everything that had happened, Despite all the politics and danger and confusion, he realized something. When they had burst into his room to save him, when they had fought for his life without hesitation, he had felt something he had never felt before. He had felt like he belonged somewhere. "Yes," he said, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. "Yes, I am." The three sisters smiled, and the room filled with a light that had nothing to do with the emergency power systems. But, added, holding up a finger, "we do this my way, on terms that work for both humans and we figure out how to deal with all this political mess before anyone else gets hurt." "Agreed," the sisters said together. Matriarch Cosmos, who had been standing quietly in the doorway throughout the fight, stepped forward with a proud smile. "Welcome to the family," she said. "Now let us plan your future." The ceremonial hall on Harmony Point had been transformed for the occasion. Floating crystals provided soft light that shifted through every color could imagine, and several he couldn't. Representatives from dozens of species filled the seats, though noticed that the security was much than usual. "Nervous?" Lyra asked, adjusting the ceremonial collar he wore. It was made of the same material as their robes and felt warm against his skin. "Terrified," admitted honestly. "I'm about to make promises to 3 incredible women in front of half the galaxy. A little nervousness seems appropriate." Nova laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "You face down pirates and assassins without hesitation, but a ceremony frightens you." "Pirates I can handle," said with a grin. "They just want to hurt people. This is way scarier because it actually matters." Stella took his hand and squeezed it gently. "It will be perfect," she said. "We have planned everything carefully." The planning had taken weeks. The assassination attempt had been traced back to a conspiracy involving 3 different species, all worried about what a human alliance might mean. Had insisted on being involved in the investigation, and his insights had helped uncover the full scope of the plot. "You think like a criminal," the station security chief had told him admiringly after figured out how the conspirators were smuggling weapons onto the station. "I think like someone who has to solve problems with limited resources," had corrected. "Sometimes that's the same thing." The conspiracy had been stopped, but the underlying political tensions remained. That's why had insisted on modifying the traditional bonding ceremony. "Are you ready?" Matriarch Cosmos asked, appearing beside them in robes that seemed to contain entire nebulae. "It is time." They walked together into the main hall, was amazed by how many beings had come to witness the ceremony. He recognized diplomats, traders, scientists, and even some of the refugees he had helped save. They were all here to see something that had never happened before, a human joining a Bond family. Ambassador Williams was in the front row, practically glowing with pride. Captain sat next to him, still keeping a watchful eye on security. Even some of the rock people from his first diplomatic mixer were there, their crystalline faces reflecting the ceremonial lights. At the center of the hall stood a raised platform surrounded by more floating crystals. This was where the ceremony would take place. But instead of following the traditional ritual exactly, had worked with the sisters to create something new. They would honor both human and customs, creating a template that other species might use in the future. "Friends and honored guests," the ceremonial speaker began, her voice carrying easily through the hall. "Today we witness not just a bonding between individuals, but the birth of a new kind of family, one that bridges worlds and species." The ceremony itself was beautiful and surprisingly emotional, and the 3 sisters exchanged vows that spoke of love, loyalty, and mutual support. They promised to protect each other, to grow together, and to face whatever challenges the universe might send their way. But they also added new elements, spoke about human concepts of individual growth within a relationship, while the sisters explained ideas about family unity. They created vows that honored both traditions. "I promise," said, looking at each sister in turn, To be the best partner I can be while still being myself. To grow with you but not lose who I am in the process. We promise, the sisters replied together, to love you as you are while supporting who you might become. To share our lives completely while respecting your need for individual identity. When they exchanged the ceremonial bonds, delicate chains of light that wrapped around their wrists and then faded into their skin, felt something change inside him. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was more like finding a missing piece of himself he hadn't known was gone. The hall erupted in celebration. Beings who had been suspicious or concerned about the match now cheered loudly. Even some of the political opponents looked impressed by how the ceremony had honored multiple traditions. But the real surprise came after the formal ceremony ended. Ambassador, the who had threatened weeks earlier, approached the new family with her delegation. "Human," she said formally, "we have observed your actions and your character. We believe there is wisdom in this bond. The Federation would be honored to open formal diplomatic talks with your new family unit." Over the next hour, similar offers came from a dozen different species. What had started as a source of political tension was becoming an opportunity for new kinds of cooperation. "You see," Matriarch Cosma said proudly as they watched the impromptu diplomatic meetings beginning to form. "This is what happens when someone has the courage to try something new." 6 months later, stood on the observation deck of an exploration ship, watching an unknown star system grow larger through the viewport. The ship was on a diplomatic mission to a newly discovered species and was serving as the cultural liaison officer. It was amazing how much his life had changed. He was no longer processing trade permits on Earth. Now he was part of a team that traveled the galaxy, helping different species understand each other better. "The preliminary scans are complete," Nova called from the science station. "The planet shows signs of advanced civilization." "Communications are standing by," Lyra added from her position at the tactical console. Her role was to ensure their safety during first contact situations. "Cultural databases are loaded and ready," Stella reported from the communications array. She had become the expert on learning new languages quickly. Smiled as he watched his family work together. They had found their rhythm over the past months, each bringing their own strengths to their missions. The sisters provided the technical expertise and diplomatic training, while offered what they had come to call human perspective, the ability to find unexpected solutions and connect with others emotionally. "Ready to make history again?" Lyra asked, moving to stand beside him at the viewport. "When you put it like that, how can I say no?" replied. The truth was, he loved this life. Every day brought new challenges, new problems to solve, new people to meet. His old job had been safe and predictable, but this was alive in a way he had never experienced before. "Incoming transmission from the planet," Stella announced. "They're responding to our greeting." Took his position at the cultural analysis station. This was what he had become good at, figuring out how to communicate with species they had never met before, finding common ground between completely different ways of thinking. "Let me guess," Nova said with a smile. "You already have 3 different ideas about how to approach this." "5 actually," said, starting to work on translating the alien response. "But who's counting?" His joke about being single had become legendary among diplomats throughout the galaxy. Other humans had started getting requests from various species, eager to understand what made human emotional intelligence so appealing. Had become the unofficial ambassador for human relationship skills. Stella said softly, "The aliens are asking about our family structure. They want to know how 4 individuals from 2 different species can function as a unit." Looked around at his 3 partners, his family, his heart. They were all looking at him with expressions of love and trust, waiting to see how he would explain something that had seemed impossible just months before. "Tell them," said, That love is the one force in the universe that can make any equation work, as long as all the variables are willing to adapt. As he began composing the response that would introduce humanity to yet another species, couldn't help but smile. He had started this journey as a failed diplomat with a broken heart, making awkward jokes at a party. Now he was part of something beautiful and strange and wonderful, traveling the stars with the people he loved most, solving impossible problems and building bridges between worlds. Not bad for someone who used to process trade permits. "Contact established," Lyra announced. "They're inviting us to meet face to face." "Then let's go make some new friends," said, and his family smiled back at him. Together, they headed for the shuttle bay and their next adventure.